Well, the point is that I don't know that my paper is a little bit tricky, but I just wanted to discuss. Everybody's talking about. Of course, I am pro embodied cognition. I am completely working on embodiment and on physical substrates that justify and explain how cognitive systems work. So this is beyond any kind of doubt. But I was thinking about is could we thought about a possible way of thinking that is completely disembodied? Or at some point, the secondary question was generative AI, it's really disembodied just because it's using some kind of statistical approach. And when I started to think about that, of course, it's disembodied. There is not a body that captures information according to some kind of physical constraints and according to some kind of physical necessities. And then there is like a machinery in the brain or in the nervous systems or whatever. The AI and LLMs don't work in that way. Transformers, different kind of strategies, statistics, a lot of statistics. But at the same time, is working on something that is very human. It's language. So my idea was, it's really disembodied, or we could think that there's like something like an embodied structure inserted into the language. So like these vast amounts of linguistic data sets at some point are based on embodiment. So if you follow the thread of doing arguments using this kind of information, even if you apply some kind of statistical approaches to how to predict the next token, I know everybody knows about that, I know, but at some point it's encapsulated into some kind of understanding reality, how to process information. At some point, for that reason, at the beginning of LLMs, some guy said these are stochastic parrots, are idiotic machines, just statistical. And I think it's not so simple. They are not just statistical parrots. No, they are lacking true deep understanding of reality because they don't have a body. Of course, there is a great limitation in order to how to acquire new data sets, and also about how to combine information. But for example, for plenty of human processes, we here still don't have any kind of a specific answer. For example, we know how human thinking, creativity, but for example, if you check all studies about creativity, the only conclusion is that there is not a pattern. We don't have no clue, no real ideas. There is not a method for understanding how to be creative. Some guys work in the evening. Some guys need to practice sex before do things. Others need to be completely without sexual relationships for being more concentrated. So there is not. If you check a lot of guys who are described as creative, we don't have. We cannot find a pattern. So, and even in some cases, for example, I have been thinking a lot about Ramanujan, yeah, the great mathematician, Indian mathematician. So he was sleeping. He dreamed. Of course, at some point he was able to justify mathematically the proofs of his ideas, but something happened to his mind that is beyond our knowledge. So, of course, this is something that it's embodied, must be the result of some kind of biochemical processes that are combined with some kind of heuristics. This is obvious, but at the same time, we don't have any kind of we don't have any idea about that, about the real mechanism that explains that. So, I don't think that the absolute appeal to the embodiment justifies the acquisition and of new knowledge from my perspective. So my idea was, what if consider LLMs are like secondary hand approaches to human cognition? The difference is that we are not talking about just one author, but we are talking about millions of authors that are compiled into this system. So at some point, the main reasoning strategies will follow this kind of reasoning that is embodied. So at some point, the products of LLMs, even if they are using a statistical analysis, are based on some kind of cognitive embodiment, specific embodiment of human beings. For that reason, I tried in that paper of discussing these kind of things. It's really disembodied, this thinking. I think that it's not disembodied because even when they work at a multimodal level, even if we know that there are plenty of statistical tools applied on obtaining results, are based about how we need to process and how we process information, unless you are really using different kind of things. For example, those guys who were cheating in the last months using LLMs, introducing hidden prompts. So if you don't read white letters over a white background, you cannot process. But this is just a formal aspect. But even at that level, they are following cognitive ways of thinking as humans. Yeah. For that reason, I thought that it was relevant to think about how this embodiment is placed there. And even at the second level, and I have also a different paper in that direction. It's called, I am thinking about what if we could design neurodiverse AI? Because again, I know AI is not based on real neuronal network. It's just a big inspiration from the beginning until now. But if we are using huge human data sets and most of humans are neurotypical, what if we try to design these AIs following different patterns of attention? For example, being able to select this kind of different like parafunctional properties that this or some of these guys have. So why not? Why not change the weights of attention? Why not change the weights of understanding multimodality? It's just a different way of obtaining information from data again. So why not design new AIs based on different cognitive mechanisms or paracognitive mechanisms that were inspired in these kind of things? Or even not so long ago, I wrote a paper about hormonal computing. So I think that the starting point for scientists, even as social scientists or humanists like me, it's always reality. And of course, if we are talking about cognition, about existing cognitive systems, because they're the best repositories for extracting strategies or heuristics. At the same time, AI gives the freedom of mathematics. You can do whatever you want inside the limits of formalization, of course, and the computing systems. That, of course, everybody's talking, and it's based on a standard natural computing, but we are at the beginning of a new revolution on quantum computing, and there are plenty of very relevant things that connect quantum computing possibilities with cognitive implications or simulations or emulations inside these kind of new computers that change how these computers can behave or can process information. So I think that, of course, the physical background is fundamental, and we must be empirical. But at the same time, we are talking about information. Humans are not, and I'm not saying that you think you don't know, of course, but it's like a lot of people take for granted that the only thinking process and the understanding of reality is the human understanding, as if we were not aware of all the scientific revolutions about what is reality. For example, my last 5 years research has been like 60% devoted to causal analysis in artificial intelligence, and I started to devoting 2 years about just thinking about causality, but not about all these typical debates, because philosophers are really boring all the time. But you need to discuss blah 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 blah, not just talking about what means that something has a causal relationship with another thing. And for example, I try to avoid all my philosophical training, not my philosophical spirit, but my philosophical training. I will not be interested in debating Hume or that or the no, just what is a causal relationship. At the end, it's and at some point I realized that causal relationships are nothing without an agent that finds a pattern. And in order to find a pattern, you need to pre-decide, even unconsciously, plenty of things. For example, time. Which is the duration of your observation? It's so stupid that I was at some point, I remember I was reading and I was thinking, but I am stupid. I have been talking about without taking this into account. In order to understand causally, you need to decide the temporary lengths of your observations. Chemical bonds of water are just implied femtoseconds, but water is changing all the time. It's not a continuous connection of chemical things. There is a continuous connection, but breaking and bonding, breaking and bonding, breaking and bonding. But from a macro scale, like our scale, we are not macro, of course, but if we, in relation to water, we could consider as macro. This is something like a stable, but it's not a stable. So first of all, it's time. And second, the mechanistic scale of your observation. You can talk about quantum level, you can talk about chemical, biochemical, organistic, social, of all the events. So there is not just cause and effect. Even today are plenty of guys talking about counterfactual thinking, and again, it's fantastic, it's necessary, and I'm working on that things too. And for AI, using logical patterns and logical rules, and it's necessary, and we can do that. But at the same time, if you try to design from scratch something that can design counterfactuals, again, you need another thing. You need an agent that is able to think from a systematic perspective. And this is not just for, it's not cheap. There is a lot of effort designing some kind of event of entity that is able to map reality, to design like a strategy, and then to consider alternative possibilities of that reality. And this is a heuristic, a very specific heuristic, and it's not just automatically generated. You need to put your effort into that. So for that reason, I'm very interested on and you too, on basal cognition, on minimal cognitive systems. We shared a paper about slime mold cognition, and for example, as a co-authors. And again, I'm not losing the connection with these physical constraints, but again, these physical constraints are not free, and not at the same time are not mandatory, in the sense that we are always based and constrained by these physical conditions, but at the same time, some kind of meta learning possibilities, and in relation to AI is obvious, we can change the rules of these things, but never losing the perspective, the eagle view, that it's always necessary at some time stop and make like an eagle view of your research and your thoughts, to discover that you need to take plenty of decisions in order to know. And all living entities do these things. Of course, by basic levels are constrained mostly by physical and by biological constraints, and later you can add more levels of complexity, and at some point you can add linguistic and symbolic and other kind of things. But even not only symbolic, but again, for example, Ramanujan used different cognitive approaches. For example, visual approaches, like topological approaches to thinking about mathematics. It was not a conscious approach to thinking about sets of data. It was something that his mind tried to do. Guess what could happen if some kind of things. For that reason, he was not able to connect some final theorems or some final mathematical statements with the whole set of rules that explain the thing. He just have intuitions. And if you check most of great scientific changes and check the sources and the real deep thoughts of these guys involved into these things, there is always intuition. So why not try to check why intuition is generated? Of course, in the case of human beings, there's like a very complex biochemical soup combined with social aspects that shape this set of possibilities. But for the rest of cognitive systems, the level of this kind of complex interactions perhaps changes. In the case of AI, we are playing with a different set of rules. But again, I think that because are based on us and about how we are thinking, these systems are embodied. For that reason, I think that until we don't find, if we find real AGs, that this kind of completely smart entities that can think in a different way, we will not be aware about how we can be thought different things. I don't know. For example, I'm sure that classic Greek mathematicians would be really outraged and even horrorized if they check the contemporary functioning of mathematics, that with plenty of, I don't know, computational proofs, for example. It's like, it's crazy. No, we don't have a complete formal analysis. We only have a statistical approach to some kind of understanding of some kind of theoretical situation, the four-color theorems, for example, or things like that. So these things change from time to time and from discipline to discipline, but at the same time, I think that if you check from a transdisciplinary perspective, at this historical moment, we have the real possibility of checking different ways of dealing with data, that even going over our own ways of thinking. LLMs are just thinking like us at this moment, with some kind of differences, because they're based on us, but they are not dealing with huge and non-control data sets. There is not a zero approach to the information with any kind of AI today, only with very controlled systems like the DeepMind systems that, okay, they don't train their model with the rules of Go or chess, but yes, but it's Go only. It's a very reduced universe of possibilities. But in the human and in the universe, there are so many possibilities that we have not tried to do this with the universe. And this is I think it's the real difference with AI and us today, that perhaps we are preparing the path for a new way of doing things that can be called intelligence. But sure, I think that we will not be able to understand these new sets of data. But I think that at the same time, it's not tragic. I think it's like, I don't know, if we could talk with an ant, we could explain everything, but the ant, of course, just hypothetical, could not assume all these kind of things, because it's beyond any kind of possibilities of thinking about reality. So, and I think that there are plenty of things about reality that escapes from our perspective. So for that thing, there are still room for alternative views on plenty of fields. But it doesn't justify astrology or things like that, of course. But I can understand that we are living at the beginning of 21st century of this Christian era, if you use this calendar, and most of people is still believer in religions. And of course, most of humans are defending their own languages because they are the best ways of talking about reality, and defending their cultural values as the best ones, and they are defending their birthplaces as the most beautiful ones just because they were born there and they love these patterns. And this is based on our brain functioning, and our brain functioning is not the best way of dealing with information. So perhaps the real understanding of reality will not be performed by humans. So by that reason, I'm so interested in computer sciences, because I think it's the future of meaning, a different kind of meaning. So
Yeah, so many interesting things. One thing, right, right in the beginning, you made this point that the language models are receiving basically an upload of information that was generated in an embodied fashion. Yeah, they're the benefits of this information. So I think that's super interesting because there are biological cases. In fact, I think it's pretty universal where you end up with memories that were generated by a different embodied scenario. And so, one of the most extreme ones that we can start thinking about is this caterpillar butterfly business, right? So we know now that the butterfly or the moth inherits, if you train the caterpillar larvae, you will inherit certain memories. But from the perspective of the butterfly, these memories come from a very alien embodiment. They come from this thing that crawled around in 2 dimensions, and it operated the body as a soft as a soft body kind of thing, which is a very different controller than a hard body, because you can't push on anything, right? So it's very different to move around. It had preferences that were completely different. You have these memories. The original memory is about crawl over here and get some leaves. Well, you don't care about leaves. You don't want leaves. You want nectar as a butterfly. And so you're sort of you've received, during your process of formation in the metamorphosis, you've received this weird download from some other crazy embodiment that was much less capable in some ways anyway than you are. But somehow the biology takes care of the mapping, so you've generalized and remapped this memory somehow, so you can interpret it in some reasonable way and do something with it. But I think it's a very biological example of what we've done now with these language models. We've taken information from one embodiment, and
yeah,
we've squeezed it into a different kind of knowledge system. And the other thing is that just because, at least the standard language models, not the robotic ones, but the standard ones that kind of sit there in the server, we think they're not embodied because we don't see them moving in this 3-dimensional world. But there are many spaces in which to have embodiments, right? Biology moves around in physiological state space and anatomical state space and metabolic space. There's all kinds of, and so who knows? I have no idea what spaces these language models, are really traversing. I think we as humans are pretty bad at noticing these things. Even now, when I point out that cells and tissues are actively navigating other problem spaces that we can't visualize, high dimensional problem spaces, people think that's really weird, and it's not clear. It's not easy for us to sort of visualize this. So I think your point is very interesting, that it's not as radically different as people like to think. There are biological examples of this, of moving generalized information across radically different embodiments. And and I tried to argue in this memories paper from last year. I tried to argue that in some sense all of us are in this position because as cognitive agents, we never have access to the past. What we have access to are the memory engrams, right? The molecules or the structures or the physiological patterns of memory that are formed in our body. And at any given point, you have to actively reconstruct your memories. You have to ask, what does this mean? What do these implemented memories actually mean? And so all of us are have uploads of memories from another being, past you,
yeah,
right? Past versions of you. And maybe it was very recent, so you don't need to do too much remapping because it's just from 5 minutes ago. Or maybe it's from your childhood when you really were a different creature. So to a large extent, your brain was different. Your physiology was different. The things you cared about were different. The degree of agency you had was different. Like all these things were different, and we're sort of like haunted by these memories of a different being to different degrees. And so I think that's what we're looking at here, is just we've put this whole thing on steroids. The butterfly caterpillar thing was bad enough, but now we've said, okay, now we're going to take memories from many individuals and we're going to stick them into this new cognitive system that is just very, very just very different from the architecture that was in before. But apparently that's okay. Apparently that's okay. Like that's that's one of the amazing things to me, is that how remappable these things are. The fact that you can take it from there's some invariant, right? There's some symmetry that you can take from what a caterpillar was doing and stick it into a butterfly body, and it works. And we have in planaria, when you do this thing, when you train them and you cut their heads off and they grow a new brain, and eventually the new brain gets imprinted with information with the learning. And so that information again has to move. It has to move from the tail into the brain somehow. It has to be imprinted onto the brain. And so the fact that all this stuff can move across radically different embodiments, and especially from humans, from multiple humans to a single language model architecture, and retain not the details, but retain the saliency, some of these relationships, so that it makes sense, so that we can then still have a conversation with it. I think it's kind of amazing, and I think there's some very deep invariants here that persist. Like I often also try to think about from the perspective of the memory itself, from the pattern as an agent. It's like, okay, I exist in this ecosystem of a caterpillar, and I have some power because I can control the behavior a little bit of this robot. And sometimes, I'm accessed and sometimes I'm forgotten, but mostly I can persist. What do I need to do to persist across? There's a big change coming. There's from the perspective of the caterpillar, there's this like crazy trans-caterpillarist event happening where you're going to turn into this like a higher dimensional being. You're going to fly, for God's sake, and do all this stuff. And so as a memory within the mind of the caterpillar, what do I need to do to persist in the future? Like, how do I make sure I'm not left behind? And what's the active, like what kind of niche construction can I do as a memory pattern to persist into the future, and not persist the way I was, because the exact memory of the caterpillar isn't of zero use to the butterfly, but to update and to change, so that instead of leaves, now it's about nectar and whatever. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think that this example of the caterpillar I used in one of my talks like 2 years ago. Talking about cross-embodiment, about how some systems can go from one embodiment to another one. I think it's a very relevant problem for all roboticists trying to do like general models that can be downloaded to different versions of robots that can adapt automatically to these kind of things. But again, it's a natural thing that some entities can do, and even human beings. You have been saying that we are changing. In fact, we know that there is like a synaptic pruning during the teenage period, in which our brain is like cutting and rewiring everything. And for that reason, there are so different behaviors that we can find among the teenagers. So these structures. So the important thing is that these things are happening. Cognitive systems are changing, evolving, and making plenty of very interesting things in order to deal with data. And what we are doing with LLMs or current generative AI, and even perhaps the new ways of doing AI, it's very similar. And again, we can talk with these systems because these systems are thinking inside the same set of values that make sense. How information is organized, how meaning, it's not only meaning from a practical perspective of interacting, but meaning from a epistemic perspective. We try to find some kind of epistemic answers. When I ask to my ChatGPT version, please find a theorem or inside this logical discussion, find some missing point on this, find a counter argument for this specific that don't violates this and this theorem. I am doing these things all the time, and I am expecting a very specific symbolic answer. And we, even if this is statistically blah 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 blah, there is like something like logical substructure that must be followed in order to satisfy me, because I need to think in these terms. Yeah? But again, I told you some minutes ago, for some kind of ancient mathematicians, contemporary mathematics, it's crazy. It's not mathematics at all. And the same for physics. For the pre-19% expression physics, there is no place for statistics. We cannot have statistical approaches to reality, because there is like a determinist perspective, and perhaps we don't know how to explain something, but must be something completely determinist. They don't think that the, nature behaves into a deterministic and a statistical perspective. From a statistical perspective, we don't. They cannot think that perhaps something will happen or not. Will happen. Perhaps we don't know the outcome of some kind of event because we don't have enough data, blah, 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 but must be deterministic. It's a completely different scenario. At the end of 19th century, new statistical advances, new ways of approaching to physics, at the beginning of Bayesian statistics, very controversial, of course, and all throughout the 19th century, also with the advances in modern physics, and of course from quantum analysis of this new physics, they realize that nature can be non-deterministic. So the problem is another one. How can we explain that at the bottom it's non-deterministic, at the macro is deterministic? That this is a completely different problem. But we are now living into a universe that we know that it's beyond our control, beyond our rational approaches. We know that we can understand, we can do approaches, but our cognitive structure is not designed enough to deal with this kind of data. We need different approaches to this vast amount of data in order to make new advances. So in fact, most of the most hot scientific problems today are based on the complexity of the problem, of the scale of the problem, of the impossibility of solving just with groups of guys working on something. We need the external help of machines. In fact, I'm very happy to live this AI revolution, because I thought that I had never been able to enjoy it. And now, as a philosopher, even I love to have a system to which I can address plenty of questions. Of course, I'm not asking, explain me Nietzsche. This is not the issue of these systems. Is all these sets of data, please apply this model, extract this, apply this, refine. I ask you plenty of very technical things that some guys invested 40 years of their life trying to obtain data, information from data, from cultural data, or from natural data, and today you can solve in hours or weeks very, very complex things. So it's fantastic. It's a way of thinking. It's an alternative way of thinking, and it's not plagiarism. It's not laziness. It's just the possibility of thinking being upgraded. But we are using these things in different scenarios. Modern robotic surgery platforms allow to be much more precise than any kind of human. But we are not saying that humans cannot do surgeries. Of course, can do it, and very precisely. But there are some kind of physical limitations that cannot be solved by even the greatest surgeon in the world, because the hand size has a specific characteristic. It's like military AI. It's of course it's the future of military research, because when you try to be effective and you want to send a bomb or do some kind of things, there are some embodiment constraints. For example, for flying, human pilots, even if they are trained, have a body, and when their bodies are under some kind of G pressure, they lost the consciousness. Even if they have been trained, they have performed specific exercises, they are equipped, they have very specific equipment in order to prevent that. Yeah, but From a real perspective, if you have the possibility of flying at the maximum physical performance of a plane, being conducted by a human or by a machine, it's better that you use a machine, because the only threshold for the effective operational of that plane is the physical constraints. If you make a strong change of direction, then the plane will break. So it's just a physical, not just. It's the only limitations are the physical ones, but not the embodied of physical constraints of the pilot. I think that for cognitive and scientific things happen the same. Our minds, even if we translate information into logical things, into visual maps, into blah, 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 at some point, the scale is beyond our possibility. So why not train these systems in order to make like a second step for understanding more things? I think it's something that, for me, makes sense. We are trying to optimize everything. Why not optimize philosophy or physics or chemistry using these kind of systems? But thinking, not just making general predictions about huge sets of data. This was, I think, it was the eye of the 90s. But we are at the beginning of the revolution in which we are applying new AI ways of doing things. And why not? We are even discovering new heuristics, really new heuristics. So from my perspective, the classic way of doing things, from a classic cognition, a classic symbolical thinking, it's over. We need to think in a different way, trying to guess new physical combinations. This you are doing new sets of new minimal sets of entities that are organoids, are living, are robots, are. It doesn't matter. I think that we can do these kind of things, and we can do this kind of revolution at all kind of scales, all kind of sets of applying it. And so, from my perspective, I say these things because there is a huge reluctance against AI today. Like there is a hype, and at the same time, like a lot of fears. And some of these fears are related with like the greatness of human mind trying to do things and it's not an attack to human thinking. Human thinking will continue. It's like, for example, I love chess. I'm sure that you have also been interested in chess. Everybody in our fields have some kind of interest in this game. When computers started, changed completely the way of playing chess. At this moment, best AI chess players can beat any kind of human, the best chess players. No, this is beyond any kind of doubt. But does his hand imply the end of chess? No. Is the chess that play machines interesting for humans? No. Because it's a different way of playing. So perhaps there are different ways of thinking about reality. Again, we are in 21st century, and there are plenty of, still today, of religious wars. And some kind of these wars are performed by countries with huge scientific skills. So perhaps it's possible to combine these things, and perhaps human cognition is not so over deterministic and it's not so rational as we think, but it's based on plenty of things or flavors that explain how we behave. And I think that because of this diversity and because of this incoherence, we are creative. It's my intuition that our creativity is related with our messy design. That some guy says, well, I'm not 100% true, but it makes sense for me. So I will devote the next years of my life on something that it makes sense. And why? For example, my first research field as a professional at university level was about scientific controversies. I was fascinated about what happens during scientific controversies, how things are reshaped, and when you analyze the biggest scientific controversies across history, not only Western, but also from Western cultures, you find always the same, that at some point somebody has not the real amount of data for defending something, but even in that situation says, yeah, but I think that it's relevant. So I will invest my future into that thing that it's completely crazy. For example, Copernicus was crazy from a rational perspective, was crazy. Einstein at the beginning was crazy at the beginning. Later, no. But how many efforts took to plenty of scientists to prove that those ideas were true? At the beginning, everything is against your meta model. If it's a meta model that affects the whole reality. So the normal thing is that nobody tried to change ideas, but the real thing is that we try to change ideas, even if we do not think that they are not true. We are guessing, we are checking, we are doing these things. So why not to do this? For example, I say that because, for example, at the beginning of the generative AI, plenty of guys saying they are suffering plenty of hallucinations. Yeah, and humans too. I'm not defending this kind of hallucination, but even there are humans that say that the Virgin has appeared them or some kind of extra thing or whatever. So, and there is no problem at all. So I'm not defending this because I think it's a mistake and it's not sure why, where, and how could be solved, and or if the problem of solving that would invalidate other things. The same for humans. Humans are not rational, are completely opportunistic. Even I remember a letter of Albert Einstein in which he says that he's an epistemic opportunist and that people is an opportunist. You try to guess your best expectative about data according to your knowledge, and then you try to solve using these sets of data. So we are not as rational as we thought, and our products are not as rational as we thought. And I think that the same that our bodies are a problem for designing the most efficient planes, our minds are a problem for designing the most efficient, rational, and scientific tools, because we insert our conditionals inside these tools that perhaps is not the best way of doing science, perhaps, and why we should not be able to try to change these things. Why not insert other kind of thinking inside our models of dealing with reality? Of course, never losing the track and never losing the connection with reality. I'm not talking about magic science, yeah, with magic things that we cannot check. But at the end, everything is related about physical systems that for one reason are organized, trying to guess the next step. So we are doing this in a huge scale, but even at a huge scale, we have universe models about the end of everything. And it's something that I even invited by Indiana Matske exploring into it was a very philosophical, typical, like some guys can say, this is nonsensical. Yeah, it can be, but for example, one of my intuitions is that AI at some point, if it's really can achieve like a general map of reality and it's interested in understanding everything, like most of us, even we are trying. I try, you try, I know it. We have our constraints, but there is something that is beyond any kind of control, that the universe is like a huge trap. All cosmological models end at the same point: complete destruction of information, or because of collapse, or because of the zero energy. All models at some temporal scale, so everything will disappear. All information will disappear. All. So this is a huge cage. It's like a huge prison. So from this perspective, this gives meaning. It's like death for humans. Death gives a meaning to humans in order to organize their activities and change everything, because according to that physical constraint, they change how they are, or at least they try if they can. Yeah, most of humans cannot. Yeah? So I think that a huge cognitive entity would try to understand the next step, like we do. And I think that the next step at a cosmological level is that we are here for a time, and there is not escape, no possibilities of changing that. Even if you try to collapse the universe, if you could, the result would be the same: explosion, and again implosion, and again start again. So perhaps everybody is scared about what will do. The AI will kill us because we are a menace, and perhaps we'll say, whoa, this animal is so strange. I should keep that animal close to me in some way, trying to understand about feeling reality. That this is another thing, how we feel reality. That it's so important as how we understand reality. I think that there is a connection about feeling and thinking. For that reason, if you check my curriculum, you will see that I have been doing a lot of things about emotions, but I'm not interested about emotions, about these classical debates, Ekman 6 or not emotion, universal emotions, blah, blah, blah. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested on how a cognitive system can feel reality. And this for me is fascinating. It's like the typical qualia problem, of course, but I think it's related with information. Again, it connects with, I was talking to you previously about causality. Any informational system feels the world in a specific way that it's based on the physical design or physical constraints that make possible that something it's information and something it's not information. The difference for humans, for example, when I think about quantum paradoxes, is that I cannot feel physically quantum paradoxes, but I can understand the complexities and I can feel that information into my understanding of reality. And I think that there is a connection between feeling and thinking that way. It's not just logical. We are not Mr. Spocks, just logical understanding of reality, connecting dots. Even if you are autistic or neurodivergent, you feel reality in a specific, in a different way that most of neurotypicals. But even in that case, you are constrained by your embodiment. So it makes sense. And I think that we have so many things still to learn. And the good point is that I think that it's like a natural connection between classical biological studies of reality, biotechnology, and AI. I think, and computational science. I think that it's everything. It's merged. Bioinspiration, it's the most successful way of doing things, but at the same time, we are free of checking new ways of doing things. What if could happen if this, that, and that? And the only problem that I see that at some point, all these researches are performed by the huge investment into generative AI is made by companies, private companies, just interested into revenues, not AI or knowledge or reality or improving human lives or no. So perhaps that at some point, the guys who are in charge of at small scale trying to check these new paths connecting classical biological thinking, innovative computation, new AI are guys like us from different fields trying to connect the dots and explore at small scale new possibilities. Because these companies will never try to understand the meaning of life like us. And this is I think this is very relevant. That it's for me it's the first scientific revolution that happens inside private companies. Of course, the chemistry of 19th century was related with chemical industries, and there's a huge connection between BASF and German industries or things like that, and universities and the Causality Gesellschaft, things like that. Of course, but it was performed in a different place. But today it's not the case. The most of models are closed, even if they say that they are open, they're not really open. If you want to install a full model of a very complex model of generative AI, you need a very good machine and a lot of resources. And it's not so as easy as, I install the last open model into my computer. So it's like when people say, Linux